now that our enemies are able to be destroyed when we want them to, we want them to cause more of a threat to our player, so let's make our enemies be able to fire a laser back at us. Now to do that, what we're going to do is use the same bullet controller that we used for our player's laser, but we're going to use a different laser type for the enemies to be able to distinguish between them, basically. So we're going to go into our art file, and I'm going to click and drag this kind of tin red looking little laser. I'm just going to pop it here just for easiness sake, so we know we're dealing with the enemy laser. We're going to add a box collider to it, as we did with our previous one, and we're going to give it a trigger so that we know it has a trigger. Then we're going to add the bullet controller script to the laser as well, like that, and we're going to set the move speed to be minus 15 instead of 15, so this way it'll be moving off to the left. Then we can set our bullet impact, but rather than just using the same bullet impact that we use for our player, let's make it a bit different, and we're going to go to our prefabs folder. We're going to drop our laser impact back into the world, and we're going to change the color of it to be red. But before we do that, we're going to change it to be no longer a prefab that we've created, and to do that we'll make sure we have it highlighted here, and then go to game object and then break prefab instance. So we're going to change the name of this now to be enemy laser impact, and now over here we'll change the start color to be red. I'm going to turn back on looping so that we can just keep watching it in action, and hit the simulate button here. And we're going to change the other start color to be kind of close to yellow, really. So there we go. That'll be the impact from when this laser hits. So that's absolutely perfect. That's what we want. We'll turn looping back off again, and now we'll make this a prefab as well. We'll delete it from the scene, and now our enemy laser, we'll rename this to be enemy laser. Give that the enemy laser impact, like that, and we'll click and drag that in to be prefab, and that's absolutely perfect. So that's all fine and dandy. So the next thing to do is make it so that our enemies are able to fire, and we'll make use of the same kind of idea that we use for making our players be able to constantly fire when we hold the button down, but we're just going to assume basically that our enemies are constantly holding the button down to fire. So we're going to make them repeatedly fire, but rather than adding this to our basic movement script that we have back here, what we're going to do is create a new script to handle our enemies shooting, because we might add some different ways that we want our enemies to move, but the ability for them to be able to constantly firing, that's a very basic skill that we want our enemies to all be able to have. So we're going to separate that out into its own script. So we're going to create a new C# script that we'll call enemy shoot, and we'll open this up. Let us give it a second to load. There we go, we got our enemy shoot here. And what we're going to do is, obviously we need a reference to the bullet that we're firing. So we'll have a public game object that we'll call the bullet. We'll need the place that it's going to fire from, so that'll be a public transform bullet point, much like we had for our player. That should probably have one or two L's, not three. Much as we had for the player, we're going to need a way to count down our shots, so we'll have a public float shot delay for how long we last between shots, and then a private float shot counter for counting down between. And then down here in our update loop, we're going to say if our shot counter is less than equal to 0, so if it's less than 0 or if it is equal to 0, then we're going to make ourselves instantiate a bullet. So we'll instantiate a bullet in the world, and we'll instantiate at our bullet point position. So bullet point dot position, no, dot bullet point dot position. There we go, I was typing in the wrong thing. And then we'll set the rotation of it to be bullet point dot rotation. Perfect. So there we have our laser being instantiated. So if our shot counter is gone below 0, we'll need to reset our shot counter back up to full. So shot counter equals shot delay, and then after this, oh no, actually we'll put it before all this little bit here. We'll just say shot counter minus equals time dot delta time. So it's constantly ticking down the whole time, and then when it gets below 0, it fires the bullet and starts counting down again. So perfect, that's all we need to do to create our little enemy shooting script. Let's go back into our game and hook all that up. And of course, on our enemy himself, we're going to need to set a fire point that our enemy shoots out of. So we'll give this a second to compile. There we go. And then on our enemy, we're going to give him the enemy shoot script, like that. We're going to have a longer delay on our enemies between shots, so we're going to set that to be 1 second. Let's give our enemy over here the point that he's going to fire from. So we're going to right click on him and go to create empty, which will create an empty child, and we'll just call this our shot point. And we're going to move this so it's in front of our enemies like that. Then back over here on our enemy, we're going to drag that shot point into the slot there, and then we're going to drag our laser prefab. So our enemy laser impact prefab. Oh no, sorry, we are dragging the enemy laser into here, aren't we? Just the enemy laser into our bullet slot. I was overthinking things there for a second. So now we should have our enemy set up so that every second he'll fire a laser out. So we can hit play here. So that's all fine. He's firing his laser, but at the moment, when they hit the player, nothing happens. So let's set it up so that when an enemy's laser hits the player, it destroys him, just like the asteroids did. So we could do this by, say, we could add the hurt player script to our lasers. So I've attached that to our enemy laser now. And if we press play, it flies along, and if we can line it up, oh, there we go. It hits the enemy and destroys them. So that's one way of doing it. We could also do it, if I just remove that from our enemy, we could go here and we could set it so that on our on our bullet controller script, so here we have the other tag is the enemy, and it destroys the enemy object. We could set another tag here to say if other.tag equals player, for example, like this, then we will destroy the other object as well. So we'll destroy the player. The only problem with doing this is it creates a bit of an issue for us, where if for some strange reason our player shoots one of his own lasers and accidentally runs into it somehow, which is something that can occasionally occur. It could be a freak kind of weird thing that happens, but basically we don't want our player accidentally shooting a laser and it destroys itself. So if you want to use this way of doing it, of having it hard-coded into our bullet controller object, we need to add an extra variable into this script. So we'll go up here and we're going to add a public bool that will be called hurt player. So basically we'll add this in to say if other.tag equals player and hurt player is true, then we will destroy the player. But if hurt player isn't true, then we can just assume, okay, we're not being we're not the player laser, basically. So if player laser, or if hurt player isn't true, then that means that we're firing it from the player itself, and it should be able to, we don't have to worry about it actually hurting the player. So we can just save that and go back in here, wait for that to compile. And now over on our enemy laser, we need to just mark that little text box that says hurt player and make sure that on our player laser, that box stays empty. So now we don't have to worry about our player accidentally running into his own laser or anything like that. So those are two different ways to do the exact same thing. Either way works perfectly fine, whichever way you want to use in your own game. I'm going to stick with this way that we just added into the game here. It's a little bit more complicated, but we have a bit more control over things in that situation too.